Shalom Aleichem. My name is Tony Pino, and today we are going to continue in our series concerning the objections to celebrating Hanukkah. This is part 6. And in part 6, we are going to be talking about the legend of the miracle of the oil that is often told at the time of Hanukkah. And there is a pretty strong central focus on this legend every time we come to Hanukkah. And so those who oppose celebrating Hanukkah will bring this up every time, that to them there is no legend of the oil. I mean, the oil legend is not true, and so they really make a big deal about this, that you're just following rabbinical Judaism and that's lies, and because for them the miracle of the oil didn't happen, you're just falling into the trap of rabbinical Judaism. They'll say a whole bunch of things to try and get you to feel like you shouldn't be celebrating Hanukkah, that it's just wrong to do that. So we want to go ahead and look and see, do they have a valid argument with that type of approach towards those who have been celebrating Hanukkah. But before we begin on the opposing factor, let's go ahead and talk about the summary, or tell the story of the Maccabees here, the Hanukkah story. Kind of put it in a short summary, in a nutshell, in case someone watching this video doesn't even know what Hanukkah is. Okay, so the story of Hanukkah takes place in 168 to 165 BCE. So that's roughly 160 some years before the time of Yeshua. And this story takes place in the land of Israel, in Jerusalem. And so we have a king over the land. He is a Gentile. He is a king of the Seleucid Empire, and his name is Antiochus the Fourth Epiphanies. Antiochus the Fourth, God manifest, is what he called himself. Now, he had a goal of creating an empire where everyone is the same. Everyone is equal. There's no distinction between each other. Everyone worships the same gods, follows the same laws, and worships him as their king. And of course, there's only one people that will oppose that, and of course, that is the Jewish people. They can only worship Yahweh and him alone. And so they are the thorn in Antiochus the Fourth's side, and he is able to sway many Jews to become what we call Hellenized Jews. They love the Greek life. They're abandoning Torah. They're assimilating into the world. Amen. And they are forsaking their covenant relationship with Yahweh. So much so that they're turning in other Jews and trying to get other Jews to conform to that same worldly way of life. And it will cause a lot of problems within the nation of Israel. Now, eventually, because of certain events that occur, Antiochus IV outlaws Torah. Okay, he makes it illegal. He sets up leadership and officials and governors in the land to officiate the fact that Torah cannot be followed any longer. So people are arrested, put to death if you're found keeping the Shabbat, circumcising your children, keeping the feast days, keeping kosher laws. If you're found doing Torah, your life could be taken. If not, you'll be thrown in jail, tortured. There's a lot of things that occurred as you read the story of the Maccabees. Now, as this is going on, we of course know if Antiochus IV succeeds, there will be no more Jews in the land, because he's taking away circumcision. And so eventually, after a few generations, there would be no Jews. Okay, so there is a revolt that arises. A man by the name of Mattathias, who's from the Hasmonean line. He is a priest. He is from the first priestly order. There are 24 orders of priests. He's from that first priestly order, and he begins a revolt. Him and his 5 sons, along with some other Jews, head for the hills, and they create an army, and they begin to do guerrilla warfare against the Grecian army. All right, after a year, Mattathias dies. Then he hands the army over to one of his sons. He has 5 of them. But Yehuda, who's nicknamed Maccabee, is the one who takes over the army. And he's nicknamed Maccabee, which means hammer. So this is where the Maccabees come from, because Yehuda's army is known as the Hammers. Okay, so over a period of time, they begin to win ground against the Grecian Empire. They actually take back the Temple Grounds area. All right, Antiochus had defiled that entire area. He was sacrificing pigs on the altar. He had a statue of Zeus in the holy place. He had given the whole of Jerusalem over to his soldiers as a vacation center. And they basically turned Yahweh's house into a whorehouse with all their abominations that they continually did in the city of Jerusalem. All right. And so the revolt, actually winning back the temple, was a great victory. It was a victory given to them by Yahweh. Amen. They couldn't have done it on their own. They were heavily outnumbered. And so they go ahead and re-cleanse the temple, make the new articles that need to go into the temple grounds area so that they can light the menorah, they can light the table of incense, they can do the table of showbread correctly, and they can have the altar up and running with their animal offerings and have the daily services going. Okay. Now, when it comes to deciding how many days are they going to create for this celebration, they choose 8. Okay. 8 is a reflection of Sukkot. They had just missed Sukkot 2 months earlier. The temple was defiled. Not to mention that Sukkot is a reflection of when King Solomon officiated and dedicated the first temple. And so 7 days of purifying the temple, and the 8th day you begin the service. The number 8 means new beginnings. And so what better way to decide, all right, we're rededicating the temple, we're re-cleansing it. We will do an 8-day celebration because on the 8th day, when it is officially up and running, it's a new era, a new beginning. We've been set free from our oppressors, right? It's kind of like, our 4th of July here in America. We were set free from our oppressors who were from England. And so very similar with the Maccabees, except theirs is scriptural. Theirs was under the sovereign will of Yahweh. And so they couldn't have won it without him. Amen. They could not have won it without him. And obviously, if anyone who knows me knows that I believe that Yeshua is of the same essence and nature as the Father, though distinct and separate. And so, yes, Yeshua gave them the victory. Yeshua wanted the temple up and running. Not only that, he wanted Jews in the land. Amen. So they were able to start circumcising their children again, keeping the Torah, the Sabbath, the feast days. And so this would all be around when Yeshua came. I believe it was done, again, by his sovereign will. All right, so what ends up happening is after hundreds of years, we're talking hundreds of years even after the resurrection of Yeshua, a legend arises in what is called the Babylonian Talmud. Babylonian Talmud Tractate Shabbat 21b speaks of a miracle of oil that happened to the Maccabees when they re-cleansed the temple. All right. So this story arises, and just kind of in a nutshell, it kind of states that the Maccabees went in to the temple grounds area. It was totally defiled. All right. They wanted to get the menorah up and lit and running. There was no gold menorah, obviously. And so they fashioned a temporary menorah together because they wanted to get that lit. As they looked around for a cruse of oil or 8 cruises of oil to start running that menorah, because the oil has to be specifically done a certain way, and it has to have the priestly stamp of approval on it that it has gone through the right process. Okay, the oil had to go through a specific process in order to be used in the menorah. And so they only found 1 cruse of oil, which means it would only last 1 day. But it's going to take them 7 days to purify the temple. And on the 8th day, then they can begin to officially, start it running again. And so they went ahead, the legend says, and lit it by faith and began the process of getting more oil. And lo and behold, a miracle happened, according to the legend. That 1 cruse of oil, which was only supposed to last 1 day, lasted 8 days. And so they were able to make more oil and then continue to fill it like they always had. And so this miracle becomes a real central focus on the celebration of Hanukkah. Okay, the miracle of lights, the miracle of the oil. Now, we don't find it anywhere in the story of the Maccabees. Okay, there's 4 books of the Maccabees. It's not in any of them. We also don't see it in the works of Josephus, and he does talk about the Maccabean revolt, and he never mentions it. And so there is no evidence of it occurring until 500 plus years after the resurrection of Yeshua. It just kind of pops up in the Babylonian Talmud. So the opposers of celebrating Hanukkah will get all in an uproar and tell us Messianics we shouldn't be celebrating Hanukkah. We're following into the trap of the rabbis, and rabbinic Judaism is against Yeshua and they don't believe in Yeshua. And you've got all these traditions and this miracle and this legend that the rabbis talk about, and you guys are just falling for their trap. And so you can't celebrate Hanukkah because now you're submitting to their authority and believing in their legends. And to be honest with you, it's a lot of nonsense. Amen. As Messianics, we celebrate Hanukkah because of the victory Yahweh gave the Maccabees. That's a plain fact. Can't get around it. They give Yahweh all the glory. They know they could not have done it without Yahweh's help. And so the 8-day celebration is focused on Sukkot, the 8 days of Sukkot, just like when Moses had some people come up to him during the time of Passover and they had been defiled and they weren't going to be able to be purified and cleansed in time to do Passover. What does Moshe do? There's a second Passover that gets started in the next month. So this is very similar. The temple was defiled during the time of Sukkot. Let's have a second Sukkot, okay? Wasn't exactly the same. They said to celebrate it similar to Sukkot, but this is where they get the 8 days from. It is a minor feast. It is a tradition not commanded by Yahweh. So if you don't do it, that's perfectly fine, but you are permitted to do it if your focus is centralized on the truth of what Hanukkah is, right? If that's the central focus, giving Yahweh all the glory for the victory he gave so that the temple could be up and running when Yeshua came, there's nothing wrong with it. Lighting 8 candles, nothing wrong with it, okay? Do pagans light candles? Yes. Are you following paganism because you're lighting candles? No. If that was true, then Yahweh would have never gave them a menorah. Okay, he would have never gave them animal offerings, right? Because pagans do that in their world, right? They have priests and a temple and drink offerings and all of that. And then that didn't stop Yahweh from giving Israel their own, right? It's where the central focus is. You're not worshiping pagan gods. You're not calling on pagan gods and bowing down to them. You're worshiping Yahweh. I light the Hanukkah in remembrance of what Yahweh did for who? For Israel, the bride of Yeshua. Amen. And for his covenant faithfulness to Abraham. Because my fellow brothers and sisters in Israel, they are what? They are the tree. Okay, they are the natural branches if they are believers in Yeshua. And I've been grafted into Israel. As a wild olive branch, I've been grafted in. Okay. And yes, it is a legend. The oil, the miracle of the oil is a legend. Now, you may ask yourself, why did they even make this all up? What do they need to make this up for? I mean, isn't the victory of Yahweh releasing them and celebrating the fact that they overcame their oppressors enough? Sure it is. But you have to understand that during the time when this legend is being created, they are still under the oppression of other nations. Amen. The Romans and other people are still oppressing them. They don't have their own independence. They're not back in the land. And so every time this comes around and you're going to celebrate Hanukkah on the victory that Yahweh gave on a revolt against the oppressors of Israel, and he gave them the victory and turned it around and they won back a war that was, they were greatly outnumbered. If the Jews were running around celebrating that from that point of view, what do you think the oppressors are going to think? Exactly. They are going to want to squash them. And so my personal opinion, and I think it's a pretty strong one, is the legend is created to kind of soften the blow so that when the oppressors, the Romans or whoever are oppressing Israel at that time, don't think they're going to try and do a revolt. Because Israel has had histories of doing revolts against their oppressors, wanting Yahweh to give them the victory. And he did for the Maccabees, but he did not do it for the Bar Kokhba revolt, right? So there's times when Yahweh stepped in and there's times he did not. And so if you're the Romans or whoever's oppressing the nation of Israel and they're celebrating Hanukkah and the focus is on just this miracle of oil, this miracle that happened, it's not looking like a call for a revolt, a call for rebellion. And so I think that's pretty much why the legend arose. Okay. I can't think of anything else or any reason why, and some other rabbis have said the same thing, that it would have been a lighter celebration in that way that wouldn't have looked like they were trying to revolt against their oppressors. Okay. So is this a strong argument, though, this legend of the miracle of oil, for us not to celebrate Hanukkah? No. As a Messianic, I'm not under the rabbinic authority. Okay. I can choose not to follow the legend or choose to celebrate Hanukkah because of the legend. I could choose not to do that, right? I can choose to celebrate Hanukkah for what it really is, for what Yeshua would have celebrated it in the first century, for the victory he gave them. And it is a direct reflection of a Hanukkah to come. Not only did Yeshua, the Father, and the Ruach HaKodesh remain faithful to Israel and the covenant relationship with Abraham, but they're going to still remain faithful to Israel and that covenant in the years to come, when the book of Revelation opens up and we have another Antiochus IV who tries to outlaw the Torah, outlaw Yahweh's ways, and he begins to oppress Yahweh's people. In the future, Yeshua is personally coming back on the clouds. Amen. And so we can look forward to a future Hanukkah with a victory directly from Yeshua. So yes, I celebrate Hanukkah. Many of my Messianic friends celebrate Hanukkah. It's not because the legend of the miracle of oil, it's because of Yahweh's faithfulness. Amen. And so if you choose not to celebrate Hanukkah, you're not sinning. That's perfectly fine. If you choose to celebrate Hanukkah, you're not sinning. If your central focus is on the victory of Yahweh and giving him all praise and glory and honor, you're not sinning. It's perfectly acceptable. Amen. So until we meet again, everyone, shalom.